CNN News 18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions. There is huge furor and backlash over the latest online gaming bill, which has been passed by the Lok Sabha today. It effectively kills the online betting and gaming industry in India by imposing jail terms for offering money games. This is a $3 billion industry. It is a huge blow, almost like a death blow, to the 20,000 crore industry, which also, by the way, employs about 2 lakh people, either directly or indirectly. But the government's logic is that online gaming is basically another form of gambling. It's an addiction. It is ruining the youth of the country, many of whom have had to face financial ruin because of online gaming. The question is this now the death knell? Is it game over for online gaming? Now, this is what the bill seeks to do. It was passed in the Lok Sabha. It will be presented in the Rajya Sabha tomorrow. Likely will be passed in the Rajya Sabha as well, because the NDA has the numbers. The bill seeks to, number one, outlaw all money-based online games, irrespective of whether they are a game of skill or a game of chance. It also bans all kinds of advertising or promotionals of such gaming platforms. It bars financial institutions like banks, for example, from giving any kind of loans or processing any financial transactions that are related to these gaming apps. Anyone offering such online games could also face up to 3 years in jail or a fine of up to 1 crore rupees. Now, law enforcement agencies will also be empowered to block access to unlawful gaming platforms under the Information Technology Act. So this is a widespread, almost sweeping sort of provision that's been passed, bill that's been passed, which means without actually doing it, it is actually killing the very existence of the online gaming industry. There is a rationale for this. The government says a lot of online gaming is simply addiction. It is simply gambling. There is no game of skill or game of chance here. This is simply a path to financial ruin for a number of individuals. Ashwini Vaishnav is the IT minister. He spoke to our sister channel CNBC, and this is the government's logic as to why they've banned online gaming.
This bill aims to promote 2 out of the 3 segments where different schemes will be created and authority will be created. The 2 segments are part of the creative economy, the creators' economy, which is getting developed as part of the Digital India vision. The first segment, Esports, is emerging as a very important segment where players play as a team, play in a very coordinated way, develop strategic skill, develop coordination skills. The second segment, which is online social gaming, that is a segment which is rapidly growing, and it's a segment which helps people in education, helps people in improving the cognitive functions. It's a very important part of the entire digital technologies. So as part of this entire exercise, 2 of the 3 segments are being promoted, and India will, in this exercise, become a game-making hub. So there will be a lot of employment generated because of this promotion, because of this encouragement. It's something which is very significant. MPs who have met me from across the country, across the parties, they've all been asking for significant action to be taken against online money games. Honorable MLAs who meet, and the entire society, in a sense, has this pain which is reflected in the suicides, pain which is felt in the form of entire life's money going.
Now, many believe that the bill in its current form, and it's been passed in the Lok Sabha already, is almost like a death knell to the online money gaming industry, which is projected to be a $9 billion market by the end of the decade. The total number of Indian online gamers has gone up from 36 crores in 2020 to now over 50 crores in 2024. According to gaming federations, online skill gaming is a sunrise sector, and it could be hurt in a big way with this bill, because if they have no access to financial instruments, payment gateways, and if people are basically barred from gaming for money, then they say that this will pretty much kill the sector. But you heard from the minister, his rationale and the government's rationale is there are numerous cases of people who've been driven to financial ruin, even suicide, because of online gaming addiction. Let's listen in to the other side, what the gaming industry's view is.
That, to my mind, the government should be legalizing online gaming and taxing it, regulating it and taxing it, because then the benefits of the money that people are spending anyway on this process can be spent on social causes. If you simply ban it, it goes underground and the mafia makes money from it. We know that what's happening with gambling in this country. There is matka, there is illegal betting on cricket, this and that. Who is getting the benefit of that? Only the crooks and criminals and gamblers. Whereas the government should have actually regulated and taxed it, as many other countries are doing elsewhere in the world. But anyway, ideally this kind of issue should be referred to a standing committee and studied in more detail. That hasn't happened, and I just don't understand why.
I want to go across to L. Badrinarayan. He's executive partner with LKS. It's a law firm that's handling the online gaming case in the Supreme Court. Vishal Gondal is founder and CEO of Goki and co-founder of Encore Games. Vishal, let me start with you first. You know, there is the logic or the rationale that's been put forth by the government that online gaming for money has led to numerous cases of financial ruin. Young people have committed suicide. And it's basically a non-productive function. That's the government's rationale to this. Young people should be encouraged to get into more productive areas of the economy. Why do you have a problem with that rationale?
So first of all, Zaka, I don't have a problem with that rationale. I totally agree with the government's position. Just let's give you a context. Worldwide, there is games which you play for fun and entertainment, and then you play games for wagering. The problem was not about skill or non-skill games. Clearly, there is a huge segment of people who are using these games to wager, which is the problem. The real gaming industry, which is worth billions of dollars, and games like Fortnite or even PUBG, Free Fire, Call of Duty, Black Myth, Wukong, these are all story-driven IP-based games which are created at very, very high quality, which are played all over the world, and then people compete on it. Currently, what was happening was games like poker, teen patti, rummy, which were kind of being promoted for earning money. And that was the problem. So I am representing the gaming industry where our focus is on IP creation. And again, I really commend the Minister Vaishnavji talking about IP creation, because currently almost $800 million worth of money goes to games which are developed outside of India. So if you look at US, Korea, China, all these countries are creating gaming IPs. Secondly, most of the developed countries, whether it is China, whether it is Middle East, all have either banned or regulated this industry heavily, because there were KYC related issues. There were whole host of issues around governance, around who's auditing these platforms, on whether there is fair play, etc. So I think this industry had a lot of issues which they had to work through the government. But I welcome this move from the real gaming industry, which is creating IP.
So Badrinarayan, you heard from what Vishal had to say, and he's saying that there are games for fun and there's games for money. What the government is doing is to crack down on games for money because, as he said, that sector was not regulated. A lot of people were losing their life savings, their parents' life savings, and basically it was a pathway to financial ruin for a large number of people.
I don't think I completely agree with what my friend is saying. Not because I have anything against esport, but the fact is I've been involved in this industry for the last 10 years. Now, my issue with this bill is that it seems to club illegal or clandestine businesses with businesses which have been here and established for a long period of time. Now, having worked with some of the more responsible gaming companies, like we all know that when we go to a club, when we go to play a round of golf, or even on skill-based games, the way they are playing, some friendly betting or wagering may happen. I'm not on that, on the morality of that. I'm saying that there are companies today which are offering, companies like Dream 11, companies like Age 23, companies like My 11 and all, who allow for somebody to participate in a game which is happening in real time by creating fantasy games where they are playing on the sites. Now, there could be some illegal betting apps which have kind of proliferated and which kind of come with a sense that by putting a small amount of money, you can make a large amount of money, causing financial ruin. But to take that as the basis to say all games where money is involved is illegal or is not to be considered as legitimate, and to prohibit everything is like saying that if you have gutka and you have illegal gutka on the side, or you have mining, or you have illegal mining on the side, we'll prohibit everything because we are not able to handle
No,
this.
but Badri,
So,
answer this question. No one is saying that fantasy cricket or fantasy football cannot continue to exist. Just play it for the fun of the game, as opposed to putting money in it and trying to get some kind of financial incentive or reward by playing that game. So no one is stopping these games if they are being played not for money.
And I think, Zaka, I
So
think you made the right point here, that it is the wagering element which creates the addiction, which creates the problem. It is not the game. Games are fun, and fantasy games are great products. But the minute you connect element of putting money, taking out money, and then there is the whole issue of KYC, which is not happening at the time of entry. So kids are openly playing this. We have the top athletes promoting these games.
Yeah.
So the problem is that the impression which is being created is that these are absolutely cool games to play, which they are, but the minute the element of money added, it's a problem. But having said that, I think the government is cleared about it, right? There is the global gaming industry, which is all about IP, fun, which is making the multi-billion dollars. The reason China is such a big superpower in gaming is not because of real money gaming. It's completely banned in China. It's because Chinese companies are creating the best game titles in the world, which are played by millions of people making billions of dollars.
But Badri, respond to that.
I think I'll come back to that. I think first thing is we should be clear that you cannot take one country, China, which as an example.
I mean, Middle East, take Singapore, take Saudi Arabia,
UK,
take Europe.
Take UK, take US, the two big countries which contribute significantly to IP-based games. And both of them have responsible gaming acts which allow for online games to be played for money. 98% of the people who play online games for money spend less than 200 rupees on a game. We are not talking, again, I'm saying, I think we don't have full data, and therefore we end up coming up with these things that money wagering is improper of this thing. These are not games that have been used for the purpose of being able to earn money. 98% of the people who play online games play for less than 200 rupees per game. Okay, so I think we need to get some of these facts in place before we kind of do that. We have these stray cases of suicides. We have these stray cases. I won't say stray in a wrong sense, but I'm just saying that, take for example, state of Tamil Nadu. State of Tamil Nadu says that we will not allow any online games to be played by people less than the age of 18. They have a blackout period from 12 p.m. in the night till 12 a.m. in the night till 5 a.m. in the night. They have certain guardrails that they require people to be playing. Because are you telling us that if you ban these online games which are played for money, that they will not go and play underground?
I think
okay, so Vishal, I think I'll give you the final word on that. I think that's a legitimate thing, whether it's alcohol or whether it is any kind of thing that's prohibited. Ultimately, people go underground. It goes into the black market.
Prohibition.
No, and the point is not about that, right? The point is kids are accessing this openly.
Vishal.
So I think just before Vishal comes in, I just want to say that this prohibition that we talk about always impacts legitimate businesses.
Yeah.
It never impacts illegitimate businesses. Illegitimate business continue to operate if they have to operate.
Okay.
I think what this law does is that constitutionally it is going against the very grain of how we classify legitimate and non-legitimate.
Vishal respond to that point.
I would only like to say that if you see a company like Tencent, whose revenue is larger than all these betting and gambling companies in the world combined, is not making that revenue by making real money games. They are creating IP-based games, and that is the future. India needs to invest on technology, IP, and create games just the way we are creating movies and animation, which the world consumes.
Okay.
So right now, that is the large opportunity.
All right,
and
Vishal,
finally, as far as age is concerned, people at the right age should be able to choose what kind of games they play.
Vishal and Badri, thank you very much for this fascinating, back and forth on the online gaming industry. Certainly, this is a momentous step that's been taken by the government. Like I said, the Lok Sabha has passed it today. Likely, it'll get passed in the Rajya Sabha tomorrow. What kind of knock-on effect it will have on the entire gaming industry, we'll have to wait and see and observe. I also want to talk about something else that happened in Parliament today. Union Home Minister Amit Shah introduced 3 separate bills aimed at removing sitting ministers, including chief ministers and even the Prime Minister, if such an individual is arrested on serious criminal charges and detained for more than 30 consecutive days. amid much furor where the opposition parties tore up the bill. Some of them threw the torn up copies of the bill at the Home Minister while he was introducing the bill. Now this bill has been sent to a joint parliamentary committee for consideration. The opposition has basically been saying that the principle of innocent until proven guilty, that gets completely overturned on its head if you were to debar people or remove people from office if they don't get bail and if they are in police custody or judicial custody for over a month. Now, amid all of this chaos, some female TMC members of parliament claim that they were physically attacked in the House, while the BJP has completely and outright refuted this charge, calling it an attempt to malign the BJP. The Lok Sabha Secretariat has told CNN News 18 that the entire CCTV footage is being examined to see what kind of ruckus happened at the time of the introduction of this bill. Right now, like I said, this bill has now been referred to a standing committee.
मैं रिकॉर्ड क्लियर करना चाहता हूं, मुझ पर झूठे आरोप लगाए तब अरेस्ट होने के पहले मैंने नैतिकता के मूल्यों का हवाला देकर इस्तीफा भी दिया और जब तक मैं कोर्ट से निर्देश नहीं हुआ कोई संविधान पद मैंने स्वीकार नहीं किया। ये क्या सिखाते हैं नैतिकता में? मैं तो इस्तीफा देकर गया था और मैं तो चाहता हूं कि ये नैतिकता के मूल्य बढ़े। हम ऐसे निर्लज्ज नहीं हो सकते कि हम पर आरोप लगे और हम संवैधानिक पद पर रहें। अरेस्ट के पहले मैंने इस्तीफा दिया है।
This government is hell-bent on creating a police state. This will be a death knell and leash an elected government, sir. Indian constitution is being amended to turn this country into a police state. BNS 152, the Home Minister promised in this house that sedition would not be used. Section 316, Section 9 of BNS, PMLA Section 4, all these can be used to destabilize an elected government, sir. That is why I oppose the introduction of all these three bills. This is nothing but creating a Gestapo to ensure that our democracy does not survive.
Meanwhile, the United States has accepted that behind levying secondary tariffs or oil tariffs on India for importing Russian oil was an ulterior political motive. They say that this was to stop the war in Ukraine, to try and get Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table, because according to US officials, India has been funding Russia's war. Now, both the rationale of it, the logic of it, the action, and of course the global condemnation that followed of America, especially given what it has done, and it has put back Indo-US relationship, the strategic partnership, which was carefully built over 25 years, that has been put back by several years, if not decades. That basic fundamental trust in the relationship between the two principles has now been completely eroded, and it will take maybe years to get back. It has also fueled universal distrust of America. It's pushed India to look for other avenues, all for doing what the US and Europe initially thanked India for doing. It was after the buy-in of the American officials back in 2022 when the war began that it was important for India to import Russian oil so that world prices are stabilized. And that is what India did. It actually did the world a favor by buying that Russian crude. And now that same logic has been inverted on its head, and India is getting punished, even to the point that people like Peter Navarro, Trump's senior trade advisor, has gone to the extent of saying that it's actually India that is funding Putin's war machine, which is absolutely preposterous, to say the least. But let's listen in to what Carolyn Levitt, who is the White House press secretary, had to say, and what various US administration officials, from the Treasury Secretary to trade representatives, etc., have been saying about this whole business of secondary tariffs, or now what they're calling oil sanctions.
I think he's proud of all of the peace deals that he's been able to achieve. India and Pakistan, he used trade in a very powerful way as leverage to bring that conflict to an end. So, look, the president has put tremendous public pressure to bring this war to a close. He's taken actions, as you've seen, sanctions on India and other actions as well. He's made himself very clear that he wants to see this war end.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's move to push India away may backfire for the United States, because New Delhi ipso facto is now strengthening its ties with those very same partners that America has been warning against. Today, for example, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar is in Moscow. He's on a state visit there for a couple of days, even as the US president is keen on pushing or punishing India with 50% tariffs for buying Russian oil. Not only has India rejected this claim of fueling Russia's war machine or Putin's war machine, it's also highlighted the hypocrisy of the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Russia has laid out the red carpet for India to export its products to Russia amid these punitive American tariffs, castigating Trump for humiliating a friend of his, a friend of America's, also asserting that there has been no drop in oil imports from India.
Russia is the biggest oil supplier to India, and India is the growing and the biggest oil consumer in the world. It is natural for us to cooperate on that. That is just another point of huge complementarity, mutual complementarity of our economies, and for the benefit of the two peoples.
So US President Donald Trump started off his trade and tariff campaign. Initially it was thought it was directed against China, but now it seems that India is in the Trump crosshairs. The 3-month extension that Trump has granted now to Beijing, that seems to be elusive for India, even though India was one of the first countries to start negotiating with the Trump team for a trade deal. And an interim trade deal was very much on the cards, on the table. It was just a matter of Trump signing off on it. And that's when he shifted the goalpost and started talking about India's import of Russian oil. Now that has become a major bone of contention with secondary tariffs. It's not just the reciprocal tariffs of 25%. Another 25% has been added on top of it for India importing Russian oil. Even though the double standard, the hypocrisy of this is that China imports much more Russian oil than India does, but there's no secondary tariffs on China. Turkey imports a lot of Russian oil, no secondary tariffs on Turkey. The European Union imports a huge amount of Russian gas. Again, no secondary tariffs on the European Union. So this complete U-turn in American policy is baffling many because there was a strategic logic to Indo-US ties. It's been built over the last 25 years. It's seen multiple US administrations from Bill Clinton to George Bush to Obama, even the first Trump term, and of course Joe Biden. And even here in India, there was a strategic logic to it, which went past two governments of two opposite political dispensations, one under the UPA and then now over the last 10 years under the NDA. So is President Trump willing to throw these age-old ties, this strategic partnership, under the bus because of his own bruised ego? Because India did not give him credit for the ceasefire with Pakistan, or India did not agree to his characterization that it was him and America that mediated and brought about the ceasefire between India and Pakistan after the 4-day war back in May. I want to go across now to someone who's been closely following these developments, as indeed he's been following India's foreign policy over the last many decades. Ashok Malik is the India chair and partner at the Asia Group. Thank you very much, Ashok, for speaking with us. So you've written a very fascinating opinion piece in the Economic Times where you have argued that this is not just a temporary phenomena, or this problem is not going to go away in the next few weeks or months. You reckon this is a much more longer-term challenge for India to try and set right the India-US relationship. I think the words you've used, there is a chill setting in New Delhi. This is the biggest structural challenge to India-US relationship in the last 20 plus years. Why do you say that?
Thanks for having me, Zaka. Zaka, this is no longer just about a trade negotiation or greater access in agriculture in this area or that area, or whether we agree to X% or Y%. The issues that have come up in the past few weeks are not just trade negotiation issues. And quite honestly, the Indian trade offer is a very generous one and a very ambitious one. Of course, it could be improved upon from the US point of view. Every trade offer can. But the issues that have come up are well beyond the trade offer, well beyond the trade deal. They've impinged on India's strategic autonomy, India's ability to access energy for itself. They've gone back on a fundamental understanding between the US administration of Joe Biden and even President Trump till a few weeks ago, and the Indian government on the importance of keeping Russian oil in play in the global energy market. Which was why India was importing Russian crude and then refining it and selling it back into the global market. Questions have been raised about India's fundamental security challenges and concerns and sensitivities. And there have been a number of throwaway remarks, reckless remarks by uh, the president and others in the White House ecosystem that have severely dented political and public trust in this country. We need to recognize that. And they've also made it more difficult for the government, any government in Delhi, to come up with more compromises because the political mood and the public mood have hardened. One needs to recognize that. And I don't think there's a clear strategy in the US. It is a lot of reckless actions that have now acquired a logic of their own, an illogic of their own, perhaps.
What happens now, though? I mean, I'll come to the long-term implications of this. What happens now? The Chinese foreign minister was in India over the last couple of days. He was here today. He was met with a national security advisor. He's met with the prime minister. He's invited the prime minister to be part of the SCO meeting later this month. The prime minister is likely to go. I think it'll be the first time he's traveling to China in the last 7 or 8 years, certainly since Galwan. Many are saying, oh, this will mean that India will now naturally start sort of drifting towards China, bettering its relations with China, so on and so forth. But there is a limit to it, right? Especially after what happened 5 years ago. And there is this contested border that is unresolved. Let's face it. I mean, these are the two rising powers in this part of the world, and there will be competition between these two powers. So there are limits to how close India can get to China.
No, because there's a cooling off with America, which has not been caused by India, which is a position we've been forced into, does not automatically mean that relations with China become idealistic. I'll repeat something a very senior Indian government official told me many years ago, a defense ministry official. He said the Indian military does not want to replace a historical dependency on Russia in terms of arms and weapons platform supplies with a historical dependency on say the US or say France or say Israel or any other country. It wants to diversify as any good country should, and it wants capacities at home as well. In the same way, in terms of India's foreign policy relations, India wants good relations or adequate relations with a number of countries, which are important to India, right? With China, in October last year or thereabouts, there was some sort of settlement of the friction points of the border, and after that, it was clear that there would be some economic engagement being restored. It would be limited economic engagement. It would be economic engagement where India needs to do to help India's own manufacturing ambitions, whether it is in terms of importing components or intermediates for Indian manufacturing industries, or whether it's importing machinery to set up factories in India, or tunneling equipment or boring equipment. This is very different from a normal relationship with China that might have existed before the Galwan skirmish, and which would have had China walking into the entirety of the Indian public procurement space, or Chinese apps and Chinese digital technologies having free play in India. I don't think anyone's going back that far. But some engagement with China is necessary. It is the world's biggest manufacturing economy. It is a supply chain hub, and any country that needs to manufacture anything needs a relationship with China to import components, engineering equipment, and so on. And India needs to do that as well. We can't boycott China, as it were, but we need to have guardrails in place, especially when it comes to critical sectors of our economy. And that I think will continue. So I do believe some of this mini rapprochement with China and restoration of economic engagement with some guardrails was coming anyway. And coming this month, because the SCO summit is also on the anvil. What has happened is that all of this has acquired a new context, given where the India-US relationship has gone in the past few weeks. And quite honestly, President Trump has ended up giving Chinese propaganda done it a lot of favors.
Oh yeah, a huge leg up to the Chinese position. But I want to come back to the question of how does India deal with Trump, because he's going to be there for the next 3 years. I mean, he is the president. There have been suggestions that India should find a way to try and not give him credit, but at least say, okay, thank you for your interest in the India-Pakistan matter, But, short of saying that you mediated or whatever through back channels, will that help? Some people are saying a phone call by Prime Minister Modi to President Trump might actually sort it out. Do you think any of this will actually help?
No, I'm a little wary of coming up with quick, even flippant solutions, which have been advocated by many people. I understand that. A phone call with President Trump, where Prime Minister Modi tells him, you helped resolve the India-Pakistan skirmish or conflict as part of Operation Sindoor, and the Indian military and the Indian government did not exercise its autonomy to stop the war, is simply not possible. Please consider what message we'll be sending with that. A phone call with President Trump to close the trade negotiations is not the way India does business. Trade negotiations are undertaken by trade negotiators. There is a draft in the White House waiting for its approval. It has not been rejected, but not been accepted either. It's just lying there. I don't think the non-acceptance or rejection is on merits because it's a fairly substantive offer from India. Of course, it can be improved. Every offer can be improved, but it's still there. And President Trump and his team, in not accepting it, are depriving American companies, American exporters of a strategic advantage and a market advantage in India. One does not understand why that is happening. Obviously, something else is at play here, and just a phone call and a few sweet-sounding words are not going to resolve the issue. Okay. Also, given how President Trump's phone calls have gone with other leaders, especially some Southeast Asian leaders, at the conclusion of trade negotiations or tariff negotiations with those countries, if you look at Vietnam or Indonesia, they haven't gone well. There's been a one-sided conversation. And there is wariness in New Delhi, and as there will be in any respectable capital, to avoid that situation.
But on the secondary tariffs, which I think India is the only country that's facing these secondary oil tariffs for importing Russian oil, is the best case scenario there that India hopes that this process that's now kicked off, first with Trump meeting Putin and then Trump meeting all of these European leaders and Zelensky yesterday, eventually there will be some form of peace agreement and the war in Ukraine stops, and therefore the rationale for India to import more Russian oil goes away, or at least the rationale the Trump and his team are using to punish India, that goes away.
Please understand, why is India importing Russian oil? India is importing Russian oil because there was a run on India's traditional energy suppliers in the Gulf, both for gas and for crude oil, because the Europeans turned their attention to those markets once the Russian oil market had been shut down following the Ukraine war. Though the Europeans still buy a lot of gas from the Russians, and that has not stopped. America itself has bought palladium, uranium, fertilizers from Russia. In fact, President Putin, in his remarks to the media in Alaska, thanked President Trump for the 20% increase in Russia-US trade after President Trump has taken over and entered the White House in January this year.
All the leaders are here, and the security in Ukraine depends on the United States and on you.
We're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
The situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. The security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that.
So what a week it's been in international diplomacy, particularly with reference to the Ukraine war. There was Alaska, where Trump and Putin met. And then earlier this week at the White House, there was the Trump and Zelensky meeting. And then, of course, a host of an array of European leaders who had sort of rushed to Washington to ensure that whatever was being agreed to was not some kind of strong arming of Ukraine into accepting a deal that it can't keep up. So let me go across to someone who is arguably the foremost Russia expert in the world, Professor John Mearsheimer. He's been talking about this for the last 3 years since this war began. Thank you very much. I want to first talk about, what happened in Alaska, followed by what happened earlier this week at the White House. What is your reading of whether Trump will actually be able to do the almost unthinkable, and that is to find a lasting peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, whatever the terms might be?
I think there's no reason to think that President Trump can get a lasting peace agreement here. And the key is to understand that there are 4 different players in the game: President Trump, President Putin, the Europeans, and the Ukrainians. And the fact is that the Russian position is so at odds with the European and Ukrainian position that there's no way you can strike a compromise. They're just miles apart. President Trump can sit down with President Putin, and I believe they could work out a deal. I believe that President Trump would make the necessary concessions to President Putin, and they could come up with some sort of satisfactory settlement. But the fact is that could never be sold to the Ukrainians and to the Europeans, who remain as hardline as ever vis-a-vis the Russians. And the Russians, of course, have a set of non-negotiable demands. So there is no peace agreement in sight, and this one is going to be settled on the battlefield.
So the 2 things that stood out, and the 2 things on which a lot of conversation happened both in Alaska as well as in DC earlier this week, was one, territorial concessions, that Ukraine will have to give up a certain amount of land, possibly 20% of the land, maybe all of the Donbass, certainly Crimea. That's what President Trump alluded to in his social media post. And the second one were the terms of a security guarantee. Although he was not specific about it, he did say that America will backstop whatever the security guarantee is to Ukraine. Could you sort of shed some light on both of these things? How feasible, how possible is it that Ukraine gives up 20% of its territory for peace? And 2, it does it because there is some kind of American backstop or security guarantee that Russia won't attack again?
Let's deal with the territorial exchange first. The Russians have made it clear that they are not giving up any of the 4 oblasts that they have now annexed, or Crimea. And the Ukrainians have made it clear, and the Europeans backed them up, that they will allow the Russians to have that's 0, Ukrainian territory. So there is no way you can square that circle. The idea that you're going to have some sort of territorial exchange, and it's quite clear what that territorial exchange will look like, is an issue that the media fixates on in the United States, but has no reality to it. It's just not going to happen. There's not going to be a territorial exchange unless it's done as a result of events on the battlefield. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a negotiated settlement, and you're not going to get a territorial exchange based on a negotiated settlement. With regard to security guarantees, the Russians went to war because they did not want Ukraine to become part of NATO. They did not want Ukraine to have a security guarantee, an Article 5 guarantee. It is, in my opinion, unthinkable that the Russians would now allow the United States and the West more generally to give Ukraine what is effectively an Article 5 guarantee, a real security guarantee. The best that the Ukrainians and the Europeans can hope for is that the Russians agree to some meaningless security guarantee, some security guarantee that they can veto down the road. So you're not going to get a security guarantee from the West to Ukraine. You're not going to get a territorial exchange. This one, again, is going to be settled on the battlefield.
So I want to come to the India angle to all of this. India, wittingly or unwittingly, has now been dragged into this with the oil tariffs. And now the White House is calling it sanctions for importing Russian oil. I think President Trump said that on his way to Alaska or after that, if you're going to squeeze Russia's second biggest oil customer, then that will naturally put some pressure on Russia. The feeling here in India is being singled out, not necessarily for trade reasons, because India is not even the largest importer of Russian oil. It's actually China. And there are no oil tariffs or oil sanctions on China, but there are on India. India is the only country that has this 25% oil tariffs or oil sanctions for importing Russian oil. What do you make of that?
I think that's true. I think up until the Alaska meeting, Trump was talking frequently about putting secondary sanctions on Russia. And as we all know, secondary sanctions means sanctioning China and India. And the problem that Trump faced was that he could not sanction China, right? He had gone down that road earlier in the year, and the Chinese just have too much leverage over us. The Indians are a different story. He thought that he could put great pressure on India to reduce its imports of oil from Russia. And the Indians told him that was not going to happen. That made him very unhappy. And he slapped another 25% worth of tariffs on India as a result. Now, one could argue that this problem has largely gone away, at least for the time being, because it's very important to understand that the principal reason that you had the meeting in Alaska was because Trump wanted to get out of the secondary sanctions mess that he had created. He knew that it made no sense to put secondary sanctions on India or to threaten to do it to China. It just wasn't going to work. But he had promised that on August 8th, those sanctions would go on. So he was looking for a way to avoid that problem. He sent Steve Witkoff scurrying off to Moscow, and they arranged a meeting, the Alaska meeting, of course, a week later on the 15th of August. And when the meeting was over with, Trump said very clearly in an interview that secondary sanctions are taken off the table. Because again, the meeting was held to begin with in large part because of secondary sanctions and to try to get that off the table. This meeting was not held because Trump and Putin were close to a deal. There had been no negotiations underpinning this meeting that indicated that they had a deal that was close to being finalized. That was not the case. This meeting was initially all about putting the secondary sanctions issue to bed, and that has happened so far. But the problem that the Indians face is that Trump has a mercurial personality, and he may have taken secondary sanctions off the table for the time being, but who knows what he'll do next week or the week after that.
So I just want to, stress on that point and try and get a little more clarity on this, because if you are suggesting that the very reason why he put these secondary sanctions in India for importing Russian oil was to try and get that meeting in Alaska, and now that that meeting has happened, you're saying that the rationale or the logic for that secondary sanctions does not exist anymore and therefore it goes away. Although the understanding here in India is that he'd given, I think, a 3-week pause. So from the 27th to the 28th of August, those sanctions kick in. You're saying that it's likely it won't, because the rationale of it has now expired, or at least the purpose of it has been achieved.
Yeah, just to be very clear, he got himself into a mess by threatening to put secondary sanctions on both India and China on August 8th. Mm-hmm. And the Alaska meeting was designed to get him out of that mess. And my point is that it succeeded. And there's no need to put secondary sanctions on now. So he's not talking about secondary sanctions. And my guess is that the sanctions, the second 25% set of sanctions that are supposed to go on August 27th, will not go on. Now, I may be wrong on that because, again, it's very difficult to tell exactly what Trump will do from day to day. Mm-hmm. But the secondary sanctions issue is off the table. You see, it's very important to understand what's happening here at a higher level. What Trump has, I think, come to recognize is that he can't solve the problem. As I said to you before, Trump can work out a deal with Putin in all likelihood, but he can't sell it to the Europeans and to the Ukrainians. The Europeans and the Ukrainians are at loggerheads with the Russians. So what Trump is doing very subtly is he is distancing himself from this conflict, and he's putting the burden of dealing with the Russians on the Europeans and on the Ukrainians. He says this all the time. And what he wants to do is he wants to step back and act as a moderator. He understands full well that he can't get completely divorced from this situation, but he wants to move away as much as possible. And I think in keeping with that policy direction, I think that the secondary sanctions issue is off the table. He's not as interested in coercing Putin as he was before August 8th.
But tell me, Professor, how does one then explain what people like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has been talking about, Peter Navarro, who's a senior trade in fact, Navarro wrote in the Financial Times earlier this week saying, and I quote, India acts as a global clearinghouse for Russian oil, converting embargoed crude into high-value exports while giving Moscow the dollars it needs. India is now cozying up to both Russia and China. The feeling here in India is, A, this has nothing to do with import of Russian oil. B, this is a political gesture. C, Trump is squeezing India because, in the words of many of his administration officials, including Rubio and others, they can't squeeze China like the way they're squeezing India. And the biggest feeling is a sense of betrayal of this 25-year strategic partnership between India and the United States, which has survived, four or five different administrations in the U.S., 2 different political dispensations here in India over the last 2.5 decades. He's basically thrown that under the bus.
I think there's no question about it. I don't understand why he's doing this. I think it's remarkably foolish. And many people in the United States would agree with that. But the question on the table is, why is he doing this? And I think there's sort of 3 dimensions to it. The first is just the purely economic dimension. And there were tensions between India and the United States on this issue going back to the early period after Trump moved into the White House. So just at a purely economic level, with regard to things like trade barriers and tariffs and so forth and so on, there was trouble. Then there's the whole geopolitical dimension. And there are 2 dimensions built into that. One is the China dimension, and the other is the Russia dimension. And what's very interesting here is, if you think about it, because the United States is not having significant problems with China today, and the whole question of containing China is in the background, that means that there's no real imperative for close U.S.-Indian relations. If there were real problems for the United States and East Asia today, that would push the United States and India closer together. But the fact that there's no problem in East Asia actually works to allow the Russian dimension to overwhelm the China dimension. And the Russian dimension up to now has pushed India and the United States apart. So geopolitics is causing all sorts of problems here, number one. And number 2, the economic relationship is causing all sorts of problems. And number 3, you have President Trump. President Trump is very transactional. He has no loyalty to anyone who he deals with, and that includes Modi. And furthermore, he's remarkably transactional. That's just the way he does business. So when you put all 3 of these things together, it's not surprising that we have all this trouble today. It's certainly not in America's interest, in my opinion, and it's not in India's interest, but it's where we are at.
No, so my final question, and the irony of this whole thing is, Trump a few months ago had sort of railed and ranted against BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What his secondary sanctions, this twisted logic of imposing these oil tariffs in India, what it has done is Yesterday, the Chinese foreign minister was here in India, and India, as you know, has had a pretty tumultuous relationship with China over the last 5 years. He's invited the Prime Minister, who will go to China, meet with Xi Jinping. It's the first time in 7 years that Prime Minister Modi will be traveling to China. So there is a degree of thaw now in the India-China relationship. The Indian foreign minister, even as we speak, is in Russia today. And he is, again, going to invite President Putin to come over to India at some point later this year. And likely President Putin and Prime Minister Modi will also meet when they are in China for the SCO summit later this month. So, ironically, for all of Trump's rants against BRICS, this is actually pushing India more towards Russia and towards China, and thereby giving the very rationale for why BRICS should exist and thrive.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not in America's national interest. If I'm playing India's hand and I look at the present situation, what I want to do is I want to distance myself as much as possible from the United States. I want to improve my relations with China as much as possible. And I want to increase my relationship or improve my relationship with Russia. Just as you describe it, makes perfect sense. And I would note that at the same time, the tariffs did nothing to solve the Russia problem. And he understood that from the get-go. So this is a lose-lose situation for the United States. There were no secondary sanctions. There's no pressure on Russia from India and China. And we end up doing great damage to this 25-year relationship between India and the United States and driving the Indians into the arms of the Chinese and the Russians.
And there's really no strategic logic in your view to what has just happened.
Absolutely not. I think it's remarkably foolish.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and for your very forthright and candid views. Professor John Mearsheimer, thank you so much for joining us here on CNN News 18.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for tuning in to Brass Tacks from the CNN News 18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
All right, let me quickly go across to our News 18 correspondent Hardik Joshi, who's currently stationed at the residence of the attacker in Gujarat. Hardik ji, कृपया करके अपना कैमरा जरा पैन करिए और हमें दिखाइए ये कहाँ रहते हैं. इनका नाम है राजेश भाई, किमजी भाई, सकारिया. इनके डिटेल्स जरा हमें बताइए, कौन है ये व्यक्ति?
चौकस ये व्यक्ति है और राजकोट के रहने वाले हैं. राजकोट शहर के गोकुलधाम पार्क इलाका है जहाँ पे वो रहता है. उसके घर के अंदर के जो सीन है वो मैं आपको दिखाने की कोशिश करूंगा. ये जो पर्सन है राजेश साकरिया, वो रिक्शा चलाने का काम करता है. वो आम आदमी है और यहाँ पे गोकुलधाम में रहता है. लेकिन उसके माता के साथ जब बात हुई न्यूज 18 की टीम से, तो उस वक्त उसने बताया था कि जब दिल्ली में जो कुत्ता है, कुत्ता हटाने की बात को लेकर वो काफी परेशान थे, उसको लेकर बहुत आक्रोशित भी थे और यही इसके लिए ही वो दिल्ली गए थे. पिछले दिन उसके साथ बात हुई थी, तभी उसने आक्रोश जताया था कि ये जो है उसकी दिमागी हालत भी ठीक नहीं है, उसको उसका माता का कहना है. लेकिन इस वक्त यहाँ पे आईडीएम पुलिस पहुंची है, स्थानीय पुलिस है यहाँ पे तहकीकात कर रही है, यहाँ से पूछताछ भी कर रही है. लेकिन ये जो इलाका है, आसपास के जो लोग हैं, वो लोगों का भी साथ हम बात करने की कोशिश करेंगे. राजेश भाई, कैसे आदमी है आप? कितने? मैं नहीं पहचानता हूँ. यहाँ पे लोग हैं वो इकट्ठा हुई है. हम फिर से जो उनके पड़ोसी है उनके साथ बात करने की कोशिश करेंगे. जो पिछले साल से कई साल से यहाँ पे रहते हैं. और राजेश भाई, वो कैसा आदमी है और कौन सा उसका व्यवहार रहा है?
राजेश भाई अच्छा आदमी है.
हाँ, लेकिन उसको अभी दिल्ली में उसने हमला किया है सीएम पे, क्या कहेंगे?
वो हम क्या कहे सर, हम उसको
उसने कभी झगड़ा किया है?
नहीं, कोई दिन झगड़ा नहीं किया.
वो यहाँ किसी भी पार्टी से जुड़ा हुआ है?
नहीं. हाँ. वो हमको पता नहीं.
हाँ. क्या कहेंगे राजेश भाई के बारे में? क्या
क्या बोलूं?
चौकस से उनके पड़ोसी है, पड़ोसी का कहना है कि उसने आसपास के लोगों में कभी झगड़ा नहीं किया, लेकिन उसकी माता का कहना है कि वो स्वान प्रेमी है और स्वान को लेकर बहुत काफी परेशान हुआ था और उसको लेकर ही उसने जो है हमला किया हो सकता है, ऐसी बात है वो उसके माता ने इस वक्त की है।
जी हार्दिक जी, ये भी बताइए कि जो इनके रिलेटिव हैं जो अभी तिहाड़ जेल में लॉज्ड हैं, उनके बारे में क्या जानकारी मिल रही है और इनकी क्या रिश्तेदारी है जो तिहाड़ जेल में इनके रिलेटिव बंद हैं?
अब फिर से मैं वही चीज बताने की कोशिश करूंगा, लेकिन इस वक्त है उसके घर पे पुलिस ने भी तहकीकात शुरू कर दी है, इसलिए वो घर के अंदर नहीं जाने दे रहे। लेकिन उसकी माता के साथ जब बात हुई थी तो उसने बोला था कि वो स्वान को जो दिल्ली से दूर खसेड़ने की बात है उसको लेकर काफी परेशान है। यहाँ पे इस वक्त तहकीकात चल रही है, स्थानीय पुलिस पहुंची है, उसकी माता की भी पूछताछ इस वक्त चल रही है। आप देख सकते हैं कि जिस तरीके से उसने जो है पिछली बार जो दिल्ली है वो मंडे गया था और मंडे उसके साथ माता की उसके साथ बात हुई थी। जी
हार्दिक जी, इनके बारे में और क्या बता सकते हैं? आसपास आपने जैसे जो लोग भी इकट्ठा हैं, भीड़ इनके जो भी नेबर्स हैं, उनसे अगर आपकी कोई भी वार्तालाप हुई हो, उसमें कुछ भी ऐसा उभर के आया है कि इनको क्रोध भी आता था? इनकी आसपास खुद के रिलेशंस कैसे हैं नेबरहुड में?
उसके दौरान पता चला है कि जो कुत्ते को लेकर अभी हमने उसके पड़ोसी के साथ बात की थी, उस वक्त उसने बताया था कि जो है उनके आसपास के लोग हैं, उसने ऐसा बताया था कि वो कभी किसी के साथ उसने झगड़ा नहीं किया है, वो एकदम शांत स्वभाव के थे, लेकिन वो स्वान प्रेमी है, स्वान को लेकर वो बहुत ही आक्रामक थे। उसके नेबर है, उसके साथ भी हम बात करेंगे। राजेश भाई कैसे स्वभाव के आदमी है? राजेश भाई के बारे में
वो घर पे नहीं होते हैं, सुबह चले जाते हैं, घर पे होते हैं तो बाहर नहीं निकलते।
झगड़ा करते हैं कभी आपने देखा?
नहीं, शहरी में किसी के साथ कोई झगड़ा नहीं करता।
कोशिश हम करेंगे। आप कितने सालों से इनके पास पे रहते हैं?
हम 20 सालों से उसके पास रहते हैं।
मतलब ये जो राजेश भाई है वो पशु प्रेमी थे?
हाँ, वो बहुत पशु प्रेमी है।
मतलब राजेश भाई ने जो जिस तरह से सीएम को थप्पड़ मारा है, उन्हें लेकर आप क्या कहेंगे?
हमें तो पता ही नहीं उसने सीएम को थप्पड़ मारा है।
राजेश भाई को आप कितने साल से जानते हैं? उसके जो पड़ोसी है, पड़ोसी को भी वो चीज को मालूम नहीं है कि जो दिल्ली के सीएम के साथ जो हमला किया।
आखिरी प्रश्न यही है कि क्या वो अपनी माताजी को बता के आए थे कि वो दिल्ली जा रहे हैं और क्यों जा रहे हैं दिल्ली?
हाँ, जब उसकी माता के साथ न्यूज़ 18 की टीम से बात हुई थी तभी उसकी माता ने बताया था कि जो है वो स्वान को लेकर, जो स्वान को दूर करने की बात है उसको लेकर वो दिल्ली गए थे और वहाँ से इसीलिए गए थे और वहाँ वो बात को लेकर बहुत आक्रोशित थे। यानी कि यहाँ पे यही बात सामने आ रही है कि उसकी माता जो है स्वान को दिल्ली से दूर खसेड़ने की जो बात हुई है उसको लेकर वो बहुत आक्रामक है। उसकी माता है, अभी बाहर आ रही है, हम उसका भी मैं उसके साथ भी बात करने के प्रयास करेंगे। तुम्हारा दिख रहा है, हम लोग इसको क्या करेंगे? ये उनकी माता है, आप देख सकते हैं को इस वक्त जो है यहाँ से जा रही है, किसी भी चीज बोलने के लिए तैयार नहीं है। आप देख सकते हैं कि जिस तरीके से उनकी माता है वो भी पूरी घटना से अनजान थी। जब मीडिया वहाँ उसके घर पहुंचा, जब उसने बताया तभी उनको पता चला, लेकिन इस वक्त है उनके घर पे पुलिस पहुंची है, आसपास में भी लोग हैं और बड़ी संख्या में इकट्ठे हुए हैं। लोग भी यहाँ पे ये चीज जानने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि ये क्या हुआ, क्योंकि आमतौर पे जो है राजेश भाई किसी आसपास के साथ कभी उसने झगड़ा नहीं किया और किसी भी लोगों के साथ कुछ उसने जो है झगड़ा नहीं किया। जी
हार्दिक जी, हमें सारी जानकारी देने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। As you can see, a lot of crowd has in fact gathered outside Rajesh Sakaria's residence. In fact, most importantly, the mother has refused to speak to the press reporters. It was the mother who was exiting the residence, and she's not really giving much information with regards to what motivated exactly her son to do such a terrible thing. With that, let me quickly go across to Anvit, who's currently stationed at Civil Lines, which, as we all know, is the locality where the CM's residence is. Anvit, if you could also give us a sense of what the secure...
News 18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions.
We're live from the CNN News 18 primetime studio presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions. Viewers, think about it. How many times out of frustration we have railed against corrupt politicians and their tendency to hang on in office even when they have been asked to go to jail by the courts? How many times have we wanted the power to punish them ourselves, show them the exit door, because the system never seems to hold them to account, or their conscience doesn't ever force them into giving up their positions of authority, power, when they are under investigation, when they are not out on bail but in jail? Not anymore, viewers. Not anymore. 11 years ago, a majority of voters elected Prime Minister Modi because he promised us one basic slogan: